that's a fundamental part of planning is you get input, identify the needs of the community from the residents, and that's what we've done, and it's ingrained into really a process that drives what the city does and the direction we're going. It's driven ultimately by our residents.
Welcome everyone to another episode of the Gov Gab radio podcast. I'm your host, Brian Andreyko. Thanks for being a part of another episode, and excited to introduce our first city administrator into the mix here on the podcast, where we get to sit down with City Administrator John Benson from Marshfield, Missouri. It's a small community just outside Springfield, Missouri, and get an opportunity to chat with John about, his career and how he started out in planning and trying to, kind of growing communities from that standpoint, and then his transition into being a city administrator at Marshfield. Really cool conversation, a lot of great insight from John about his journey and some of the things that he deals with on a day-to-day basis, working with citizens, working with the mayor and the board of aldermen, etc. So I think you guys will really enjoy this episode and our wide-ranging conversation with John Benson. So without further ado, let's jump into our conversation today with City Administrator John Benson. John, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Well, so I'm excited to talk through, over these first few episodes of the Gov Gab podcast, I've talked with, mayors across the country, and obviously it's a little different animal there where they have other full-time jobs and obviously it's an elected position. I really want to talk with some city administrators, city managers across the country as well, and really see that other dynamic, the other side of the house where, this is something you've obviously with your career have grown into this position. So I want to I always like to take a step back, I guess, from a background standpoint and understand. Do you remember back when you were kind of going into college? I know you went to Iowa State and kind of got your Bachelor of Science in Community and Regional Planning. Do you remember why you did that? Was there something that intrigued you back in that time that you wanted to go in and kind of work in that part, I guess, for a career? I'm curious if you start there, and then we'll kind of bring it up to present day.
Sure. Yeah, back when coming out of high school. And I went to junior college actually before I went to Iowa State, but kind of to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was always interested in design, and that migrated from specific building design like architecture to broadening that out to community design on a broader level is what more intrigued me. And so that's what led me to Iowa State with their community and regional planning program there, which community planning and design in that regard or in that context. So also I lived 45 minutes from Ames, Iowa at the time. So obviously that was kind of in my backyard and to go to school there.
What was it, obviously in some of your earlier positions as like planners at some different, cities and counties and what have you, what were some of the things that you kind of learned early on about government or local government that intrigued you? Maybe it was some things that surprised you as well, but kind of intrigued you to keep going with that.
Well, I started out along that line. My first internship, actually, when I was still in school, was with the Regional Planning Commission in Central Iowa, and how cities do what they do, I guess, was the eye-opening. And in an academic sense and class setting, you learn things of processes and the whys, if you will, of why do we do that, or why does the city do this or that. But in the internship and even in my first job out of college working for that same Regional Planning Commission was the level of detail that putting in a sewer line to provide better services or accommodate growth for a community is not as easy as, well, let's just go dig the trench and put in the pipe and connect it all together. And there's a lot of behind the scenes of the financing to that, to the engineering and design, and what is the right place or direction to account for as far as growth goes, to accommodating future growth. Where should that growth occur in a business sense of operating a city, as opposed to what other interests or other purposes or factors of where that growth should occur, or what's most economical, I guess, is what I'm trying to get across. So that behind the scenes input or decision-making process that goes into things before the actual construction of, whether it be a sewer line, a swimming pool, a street, things like that. The other part of it, I think, is often overlooked, even to this day. I think over the last, I'm going to say 10 years, maybe 20 years, I think it's becoming more and more evident to the public is the maintenance cost of maintaining the infrastructure, whether that be, a lot of times in the news you hear about bridges and state highway bridges that are needing to be replaced, and the funding is not there to replace those because of when all the bridges in the nation's highway system was constructed in a relatively tight time frame of a few decades, and now those bridges are wearing out. And the same applies to sewer lines, water lines, paving streets. How long you resurface or repave a street, and that asphalt hopefully lasts 20 years or maybe a little longer, but sometimes it doesn't last that long. And so how does the city come up with the funding to pay for that next resurfacing or the maintenance or replacing? How long do sewer pipes or water pipes last before they need to be replaced or upgraded to a different material? We are experiencing that now with what used to be a standard type of pipe of cast iron piping was very common. Well, nowadays cast iron pipe, it holds up over time, but on the chemistry side of things, the cast iron interacts with the chemicals in the water, the chlorine and other things, that causes discoloration or other issues with the pipes, where PVC type piping doesn't do that. And so it's a learning curve. Learning what used to be current technology is replaced with new technology in the sense of the type of pipe material. So just a lot of behind the scenes things that are learned like any profession, but also of just learning experience, real life experience of learning it, that you just learn on the job to some degree as technology changes as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's something new. I didn't realize there was some challenges with that. So you taught me something today. What is I'm just curious, I guess my mind's running. What is like a general, like you're talking about changing the piping, what's the time commitment to that? Like, how long does that take? Like, for your city, how long would that take to replace all the pipes in the city?
I don't have a definitive number to give you, but what drives that answer, or to get to that answer, is all driven by how much funding, how many dollars does the city have to put towards things like that versus other needs that those dollars are competing against in the community, and where does the replacing the pipe prioritization wise fit within the community as a need. In our case, in the last 2 years, we've replaced, or last year and by the end of this year, I should say, we will have replaced about 4,000 linear feet of old cast iron pipe. So what we're doing is about 2 to maybe 3,000 linear feet of cast iron pipe a year get replaced by our crews, and we're doing that with in-house, so to speak, with our own staff, as opposed to contracting out with a contractor to come in and do that. And the reason being is we can do it more cheaply with our own staff, because we don't have to pay the labor costs and the equipment costs beyond what we currently have staffing wise. Of course, we have to balance that with what else our staff needs to be doing workload wise, and what the equipment needed for that. So that's why we're just taking on an annual basis an incremental approach to that. And that's part of the factoring into that is, I don't recall exactly how many linear feet of cast iron pipe we need to replace ultimately, but that factors into what percentage of cast iron pipe of our whole system is. So it just depends ultimately to the answer to your question. It depends on the revenues the city has to put towards things like that. In this case, we're talking about replacing cast iron pipe for a water system versus using those dollars for other things.
Well, and so obviously those are a lot of the tough decisions, and as a city administrator, you got to be a part of and help make. When did that change? I'm curious in your mind of going from saying, "Hey, I'm a planner, I'm a senior planner, director of development, doing some of these things around that," to saying, "Hey, I want to be a city administrator." Was there something? Was it years ago? When did that kind of take form? I guess, or was that always the plan for you?
No, it was not. It definitely was not always the plan for me. Actually, it's um, growing up, or I shouldn't say growing up, in high school, into college, kind of once I figured out what the career path or area of interest that I wanted to get into, um, it was from being I want to be a city planner and achieve that goal, so to speak, and was a city planner. And then as I got more experience and was exposed to more aspects of what a city planner does, or the different things a city planner can do, different roles in different cities. In a smaller community, the city planner is more of a generalist in the sense that they'll wear multiple hats in the planning field of could be reviewing development plans to land use applications to, in my case, I was even involved early on in my career getting to do residential building inspections and some commercial building inspections, to my first job out of college for the Regional Planning Commission. I did a lot of grant writing for community development block grants and state grant programs, to transit administration, a lot of different ways of city planning, or a planner can get involved in areas they can get involved in. What I realized in my first job out of college was I did not enjoy doing grant writing every day, day to day, every week, so to speak. And there's cycles to that. Nor did I really enjoy just doing transit administration. Not diminishing the fact and the need for those things. It's just that was not my cup of tea. And I actually left that job for an opportunity with the city in the Des Moines metro area, doing the development review, land use applications. That's where the building inspections got exposure to that. And then from there, applied and became a community development director for a county in the Kansas City area. Took on more responsibilities, still the development review and those. And interestingly, while that first job out of college and even my internship of doing grant writing in transit administration wasn't really my cup of tea, later in my career, I realized the experience I got from doing those things paid major dividends for me, because it gave me a knowledge level to draw from, not just how to write a grant or that, but the benefits and the different avenues of grant funding available out there that I'm able to draw from even to this day. Even on transit administration in Marshfield, which is a rural community of approximately 7,200 people, we have transit needs, but at our population size, we're not big enough where it's economical or feasible to really run a transit system. And so we have to get creative and partner with in the Springfield, Missouri metro area. And we're still trying to work through that issue and that need. But I'm able to draw from that transit administration experience in my very first job years ago. So that's one of the takeaways. And I guess for listeners out there, depending on where they are in their career, but particularly younger people starting out careers, is you may not like doing something, or may not be something you're really passionate about, but don't discount that experience, because down the road that can come back and be very beneficial to you, where that does tie directly into your passion, whatever that may be. So.
No, that's great advice, and I'm curious too. When obviously you've been at Marshfield for a few years now, what's I guess what is one thing you wish you knew prior to coming in there that you maybe learned over the last few years that you wish you kind of knew early on? Is there one thing you can remember that would have been nice or beneficial to have known?
Not one thing. There's a lot of things. I guess a couple of things that just off the cuff come to mind are, as a city administrator, or at least in my experience, when I was a city planner, as I mentioned earlier, I was more of a generalist when I say that, but yet it was still relatively, it was around planning, city planning. And as a city administrator, you're now it's not just city planning overseeing that, and not that this is a double-edged sword or kind of a dichotomy of overseeing not just planning, but also the public works, the water, the sewer, the streets, we have a fire department, to general administration of the city hall or city government, to finance department, things like that. Now, having said that, I have people in Marshfield that are department heads and superintendents in each of those areas that they're involved in the day-to-day, down in the weeds, so to speak. But as a city administrator, I support those individuals and make sure we're all working in a coordinated fashion. And as a city administrator, you get pulled in a lot of different directions, because for that reason, you're overseeing the entire organization in essence, as opposed to as a planner with me, I was in one area or one department, or a department head of one specific area. And so not that was new, it was just the degree to which that you get pulled is greater than what I anticipated. And in a way, it goes back to being a generalist, where, and I'd like to circle back to kind of talk about the planner from that perspective of a generalist planner. If you're a city planner, the other thing is if you're in a larger community, particularly a larger city, they have multiple planners, and so a planner will be involved specifically for just development review, or just for grant writing, or just for transit administration. They don't get exposed to all of those things. And so in my experience, in my career, I much preferred working rather for the smaller community, because I got exposure to a lot more things and learned a lot more things as a result of that. And that's just for my personality makeup. Now, others may not like that. They may want to just specialize into a specific area, and that's okay, and that's good to know what their interest area or where their interests lie in that regard. As a city, bringing that forward to a city administrator, the generalist, in a sense, makes that transition of overseeing multiple departments and a little bit easier for me, at least. I think I can draw from that. Backing up to a question you asked me on how did I transition, or what led me from being a planning background, community development background, to city administration, what caused that is, ironically, I missed out on a job opportunity. I applied for a department head level community development director position. I was an internal candidate, was not selected. An external candidate was selected. After getting kind of past the emotional part of disappointment of not being selected, and I had the opportunity to learn from the person that was selected, as well as the city administrator that was there. And it was understood that the reasons I wasn't selected were valid. The person that was selected brought a different skill set to the table, and actually helped me, did a better job, I think, than what I would have done had I been selected, based on what the issues confronting the city became. They were better set up to deal with those with their background than say what I would have been. Not that I couldn't have dealt with them, but just they were able to deal with them, I think, in a easier method than say I would have. But I learned from that. And one of the things I learned took from that experience was I went back to school to get my master's in public administration to broaden my knowledge. I realized I had kind of, not that you can't continually learn and you never learn everything there is to learn, but I had kind of plateaued out, I think, and it made me realize that. And so I went back to school as a new challenge, got my master's in public administration. And when I was in that program, working on that degree, that's where I was exposed to public administration at a city administrator level. And that had not even been on my radar of interest area before. Obviously, I knew of the position, but I didn't wasn't something that really intrigued me. But as I went through the master's program in public administration, it broadened my horizons and taught me some new things, and that's what led me down the path of public administrator or becoming a city administrator, and enticed me to start looking at that as a career path or part of my career path. Having said that, I also recognized as being a city administrator the type of community I wanted to work in versus a type of community I didn't want to. And what I mean by that is because of my planning background, I wanted to be able to draw from that experience. And so a community that is facing growth issues or development issues, things like that, it was more of interest to me than, say, a community that didn't have those issues or were not confronting those issues. So, and that's just the personal satisfaction in the job itself.
Is there one thing like just like a citizen would be surprised? So obviously you have a lot of different things you're doing on a day-to-day basis, right? And kind of overseeing the city at large. But is there some like something that you have to do that's like some oddball task or something that someone would be surprised that a city administrator has to do, or you have to specifically do in Marshfield? I'm just curious if there's anything.
I don't, nothing that comes to mind, I guess. And I guess the reason I'm saying it that way is how I'm programmed mentally, I guess, is I view it as a city is here to serve our residents. And I'm not saying that just to sound cliche about it, but obviously a city is here to serve their residents. But everything I do, I kind of take it from that approach or mindset. I guess maybe to your question of maybe something that may surprise is I had a resident that, and this goes actually beyond city government, standard city or typical city government, I guess, but resident, the ice cream man, the ice cream truck that drives around playing the music, and the ice cream truck never went down their street, and they had little kids, and they asked me, not that they were demanding the city do something about it. It wasn't that way at all, but it's one of my, something that I take satisfaction in, a little thing that is a big, or had a big impact on one household at least. They were just saying the ice cream man never comes down our street because it's a dead end street, and they have two little girls, and so the ice cream man happened to go down my street where I lived, and so I knew I would see them. I didn't know them, but I saw them, and so I stopped them one day when they were coming down the street, a few days after I'd heard this, and asked them if they could drive down the street, and he's like, sure, and they did, and that was, to this day I see those girls, and they will talk about that, and that was over a year and a half ago. So it's the little things that can make a big impact, and sometimes you find it's not always the big projects or the big flashy things that are high visibility that have a big impact. It's the little things in life too that can be just as big to a resident.
Yeah, and that's a really cool story there. I'm curious how you and coming in, obviously, and again, being a planner, I'm sure you got involved with working with mayors or the council or anything like that. How does that dynamic work with you guys currently? Was that a new challenge for you? Was that something, is it pretty seamless for the most part? Or can you tell us a little bit about, how do you move the city forward by kind of working with those other, partners in the city, the mayor, the council, et cetera?
Sure. So in our case here in Marshfield, the mayor, he's pretty active in not the day-to-day city business operations, but he's more active than just showing up at a Board of Aldermen meeting a couple times a month. He's between meetings, usually at least every other day. He and I are texting or talking on the phone just with updates of status of things that are going on. To similar degree, to a lesser degree, but similar with applicable Board of Aldermen, though that the communication with the Board of Aldermen typically comes through at the twice a month at their Board of Aldermen meetings. but the mayor is much more is to a degree hands-on, and again, not down to the daily operational side of things, but more on the projects, what's the status, how are things progressing on different things that are going on. And so he and I have a good communication channel, either texting, phone, things like that. Also, he works a 4-day week, so on his day off, he's typically comes into City Hall and we'll meet and go over different things, meetings on different topics or issues as we need to. And so he cuts out time of his schedule on those days to meet with me, or I'll reach out to him and set up a meeting on a topic. Outside or beyond the governing body, when I was hired, the Board of Aldermen here, one of the things they wanted in the city administrator position was integration into the community or community involvement. And how I do that is I'm a member of the local Rotary Club, for instance. I also at times will attend other the Kiwanis Club meetings or an Optimist Club meeting, things like that. We have a nonprofit organization here in town known as Grow Marshfield that I sit on the board of, along with the mayor and others in the community that sit on that board. And so that's a coordination. And then probably underlying all of that, or particularly with Grow Marshfield, is before I was here working for Marshfield, the community had gone through what we call our community visioncasting process, and had a consultant come in, met with different segments of our community of residents and non-residents, but people that work in the area, and got their input, and just to ask some real fundamental questions or basic questions of what would they like to see, what are their needs, what are their issues that they identify. Those issues were all identified and then prioritized by those participants, and that's the driver for projects that we are doing in this community, moving the community forward in the way that the residents would like to. And that originally was done in 2014. Last spring, or in the spring of 2018, we brought that same consultant back, did that same exact process, but we learned from the 2014 we had underrepresented segments of our community that had not intentionally, but just unintentionally we had not heard from, or to the degree we felt the need to. Seniors, persons with disabilities, that percentage of our community that's lower income households, we did not connect with those residents in those areas. And so we made a pointed effort to reach out to, we went to the senior center on a luncheon there, and we heard from 30 to 40 seniors that we met with, or I say we, our consultant. She kicked myself and the mayor out of the building so they could talk freely and not feel like the city was hovering over listening. And it was all done anonymously on their input. We went to the sheltered workshop, or she did, met with to get input from folks with disabilities. We Head Start and Ozark Area Community Action Agency. They helped us, held some meetings where for people that are involved, their clientele met with us and that gave us input from some folks that are a segment of our population with lower income households. And so, along with teachers, realtors, the business community, parents, students, high school students, other segments as well, and that in that vision casting process. And that is really a foundational aspect to this community, and has resulted in very strong partnerships with the city, the Chamber of Commerce. We're a county seat, our county commission we work very closely with, the school district, the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club organizations. It's ingrained in this community of the partnership mentality and kind of a cultural aspect. And again, going back to my planning background, that's a fundamental part of planning, is you get input, identify the needs of the community from the residents, and that's what we've done, and it's ingrained in into really a process that drives what the city does and the direction we're going is driven ultimately by our residents.
Well, and that's right, Line. I wanted to kind of ask you on that point then, what do you foresee, and maybe it was with the study you guys had or something else, like what do you foresee as the biggest challenge the city's, anticipating in the next few years, and maybe what measures are you trying to take to, I guess, get ahead of it?
So the vision casting, we are in the latter stages of updating or developing and getting ready to adopt what we call our growth plan. The city's portion of that growth plan will become our comprehensive plan for Grow Marshfield, which is our economic development entity. It will be the driver. Or a strategic plan, if you will, for Grow Marshfield. We're partnering with the chambers involved with that, the Marshfield Development League, which is another nonprofit entity here in town that is involved with economic development efforts. They have input, and we're hoping they will ultimately adopt it as well. It's kind of a guiding document that overarches multiple organizations from a strategic planning approach. Implementing that plan will become, I think, a challenge. And when you get into implementation, I think funding always becomes an issue. And so finding the funding and the prioritization of that are what's needed to implement that plan. And I don't want to mislead that the vision casting has been that plan. What we're doing in essence is building onto that vision casting process and integrating it into, or that input into integrating it into other ways that will drive what we do. And so it's really, some communities work from a top-down process, and I don't mean that in a negative. It is a byproduct of who's elected to different offices, or who the chamber president is, or the chamber board. Those are the decision makers. In our case, that vision casting and that community input is really, it's a grassroots effort that's drawing it. So it's a bottom-up process that ultimately we have in place, and we're strengthening our intent is to strengthen that through the growth plan. And so going back to your previous question of, that's the reason the Board of Aldermen, excuse me, when I was interviewing for this job and ultimately hired, one of their key aspects was community involvement, because to partner, you have to communicate continually and work with other entities in the community, and that vision casting sets that direction, and then it's about partnering and communication with those other entities and working together in a coordinated fashion. And one of the things this governing body in Marshfield, and I've told the mayor this, he is very adept at consensus building. This governing body moves forward on things from a consensus building standpoint. If someone's uncomfortable and cannot support it, they won't. It doesn't come down to, I don't care, another alderman saying, I don't care what you think, because I've got a majority of people with me on my side. And if someone's really cannot support it, we don't move in that direction until there's consensus to move in that direction. So, and that key clarification is it's not unanimous. It's just that if somebody may not be in agreement with it, but as long as they can support it and they understand the reasoning, they won't work against it. And so they can live with it in essence. And so that as much as I like, that's, in my experience, that's somewhat rare in city government. Not that it doesn't exist elsewhere, but it's what makes Marshfield, I think, and from a city government standpoint.
And do you guys observe, and I'm curious, obviously you've been at some different, different local governments and what have you, so you've learned that way, but do you observe what other communities are doing in the state or maybe across the country that are maybe similar size or that have grown in recent years? Do you guys do anything like that to, I guess, learn or maybe don't make the mistakes they made, or I don't know?
Yeah, I'm not saying we won't make the same mistakes other communities have, but we do try to learn from other communities. We learn how we learn those things. We're involved with we're part of the Springfield, Missouri metro area, As such, there's regional meetings in the Springfield area we're involved with. So we get to talk to staff from other communities in the area, whether they be similar size to Marshfield or larger or smaller. I don't know that really makes a difference to learning. It's just what you learn and how applicable, or can we do it based on our size. Also, we're more than happy to share our story of what we're doing and how we do it, to help, if it can be a help to others, we're happy to do that. Sometimes by us sharing, it helps somebody else, and then it brainstorms into something that we learn in return of how to work a little more efficiently or achieve something that maybe we didn't think we could do. So through that, and then through training programs, we try to always make sure that our annual budget, that we have funds available so our staff can go to training sessions and continually improve what their skill set is and knowledge level is, and continually improve. That's kind of one of my fundamental, I don't know what the right word is, things are, or thing is to be a continual learner and never assume or take the approach of, I've learned everything I need to know about this job, or there's always more you can learn, and you can always get better at what you do. So, and I think my staff, or all of our employees, whether they report directly to me or not directly to me, I think that they have that same mindset. And so I think that's a key. That, to me, that fundamental mental approach or mindset is key to the future of Marshfield, because with that, we won't rest on our laurels and get to a point where, okay, we're as good as we need to be. And as soon as we get that mindset, we'll create problems for ourselves down the road in different ways.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's motivating, I think, for the staff, right? That you're investing back in them and their careers, and obviously that invests back in the city. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's a two-way street. The city, the employee, every employee has to have that mindset. And so they have to invest in themselves to some degree, but the city has to be willing to invest in them as well. So, and if, we've had conversations here, that may mean that we're helping somebody learn something there may open a door for them, that they leave the city for a better opportunity. But you know what? That's the flip side of that, is if we're afraid of that happening and we don't invest, our employees are going to plateau out, and we're going to have problems down the road. So it's just it's a risk we run, but there's other ways to deal with that, with other factors of that, things we do, our culture, internal culture, things like that hopefully retain our employees.
Yeah, it's like that popular quote that, a lot of people I see going around, where it's, something along the lines of, someone says, like, what if we invest in our employees and they leave? And the response is, well, what if we don't and they stay? So it's kind of that whole thing is like, you got to give, you got to give back. You got to try to make people better. And, ultimately people are going to continue to grow their career either there or somewhere else. So,
right.
As you've kind of grown up, obviously, with a lot of, these different roles, and kind of grown in the position you are today, are there certain things that you do personally, from a daily habits or routines, things that you stick with, maybe make you structured or focused or anything like that? Is there anything specific that you've done over your career that has been helpful?
I try to kind of go into just what we've been talking about here, of continually learning, and that could be reading, making sure I make the time to read through organizational. I'm a member of the ICMA, and both ICMA and the American Planning Association, both, or International City Managers Association, I guess, and American Planning Association. Their magazines that they send out, or the emails, electronic newsletters, things like that, reading those. And I'm not always able to do it to the degree I would like to do, or have the time to do it. But I think that's kind of going back to your question a few minutes ago about how do we continually learn. That's one way. And I've consistently tried to do that over the course of my career. it's just exposure to what other communities are doing, as you asked earlier. That's one thing. I guess from an organizational time management standpoint, that's an ongoing thing. In fact, just about a month ago, I sort of was old school with carrying around a notebook that each page was a different day, and I had my to-dos handwritten in there, and excuse me, I'd make notes from meetings in there, and I could refer back to that. And about a month or maybe 6 weeks ago, I went to a new thing, excuse me, a small laptop, and not those new things that have been around for 2 decades or whatever, 3 decades. Excuse me. And got rid of the notebook, and I've gone to basically a tablet style or small laptop that using a new app actually of scheduling and organization, and it's actually much easier because I can pull that app up on my phone, my laptop, or my desktop computer, and I've got different ways to access into that and make notes, and it's saving me time and of not having to flip through pages or rewriting things. I didn't get this done today, so I need to write it tomorrow. Well, it's already there. So, that's whether you're a city administrator, a planner, a secretary, a public works director, to somebody in the field, it doesn't matter. It's just learning and adapting to what works. And for me, I made light of a laptop being a new thing. It's not, obviously, but to me, it was what I was comfortable with. But I got, exposed to it, and I finally just made the mental decision to let me just go to this and try. Sat down with somebody, showed me how they do it, and I've tried it, and it's working great. So just time management, that's helping with my time management, organization of my day, or day and week, actually. So.
Well, no, I think that's a good thing. I mean, the fact that you're learning and again, that's one of those things you're trying to evolve and saying, hey, I did this for so many years, but hey, let's see, how do I trim a few minutes out of the day or an hour out of the day maybe by doing it better this way? So,
that's exactly what it's done. Is in the morning I would sit down with my notebook, and it'd take me about 20 to 30 minutes to sit down, where now it takes me 5, maybe 10 minutes and to do it, because all I do is go through my list of my to-dos, if you will, and put them on my day. There's a little thing I click add to my day, and it's there, and I don't have to write and search and rewrite, and it's just a time savings aspect. And to that point, like I said, I was old school, and I was kind of resistant to going to that method, even though I'd seen others doing it, and I was just kind of stayed old school with a book and paper and pen, and but I see the benefits of it now. So it hit me over the head so many times with a hammer, I eventually will learn. So,
well, John, let's end on this. I want to ask I always like to get some advice, things of the wisdom that you've gained over all these years, and you could be specific on from a local government community standpoint. It could be more philosophical advice you live by, quote you live by. It could be a mixture of both. You can give a couple pieces here, your call. But I'll kind of give you the floor here of some advice you'd share with the audience, just to kind of improve their each and every day. Again, maybe it's something around the community or government, or something, again, totally away from that, but just something that's helped you kind of get through life and continue to evolve. Anything you'd share?
Sure. I guess I'm going to repeat a little bit or touch on a few things I've said, and I'll hopefully add a few things here. But one is, like I talked about the example of the grant writing transit administration, and my first job out of college was 12 months into that job, I realized, man, this is not why I went to school. This is not what I wanted to do. Was kind of, I don't know if frustrated is the right word, down a little bit about that. But in hindsight, that has been some of the most valuable experience at times that's helped me. And so the lesson that I've taken from that is, if I'm, I may be working on something that's just, it's not fun, quote unquote fun, or an enjoyable part of the job, but I try to take that approach of, what, it's not, but down the road, it will hopefully pay dividends. I may learn something from this, and that's going to, that will make my job in the future more fun or more enjoyable. And so, take that mental approach on a work aspect that may not, or maybe it's a job somebody has and it's just not the job, but do the best you can do with it, and then you never know down the road where it's gonna help you out. That's one thing. Another thing is to be, as I mentioned, just a continual learner, and never let yourself plateau out on thinking you've learned everything there is, or that there is to learn, or because the world's changing and it's hard to keep up with it sometimes. And whether you're making notes on your to-do list on paper and being resistant to using a laptop and using technology or some other aspect. There was a third thing and it just slipped my mind. Make sure you carve time out for yourself. Don't let work consume you, because that just leads to burnout. And be cognizant of whether it's taken a few minutes in each day or a week or month, or for yourself. And for me personally, and everybody's wired differently, but for me personally, I make sure I take a week vacation about every 6 to 8 months, and just because I need to recharge my batteries and get outside the box, get my mind outside the box, my normal day-to-day box, and just get away from work. And I think that's important to just figure out what it is that keeps your batteries charged, and that you don't just burn out to the point, because then you can recharge the batteries when you burn out, but it takes a lot longer. And so I try to make sure I take time, not every 6 to 8 months. I take time every month to 2 months where I'll make a long weekend, something like that, everybody, like I said, it's different to everybody, and it depends on their personality, the job they're doing, and things like that. But make sure you take time for yourself and for your family. Obviously, hopefully that goes or is understood by everybody that may be listening. So.
Well, that's great advice, John. And John, I'm certainly appreciative of you spending some time today, kind of sharing your story, obviously your background and where things are going with the city, and hopefully that'll help a lot of other individuals and give some insight as well into some of those roles you've had. So thank you so much for taking time out. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I've enjoyed this as well, and hopefully the information or things I've shared are of benefit to others.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining in this episode, and we really appreciate if you head over to iTunes, leave us a quick review, give us a rating. We certainly appreciate any feedback you can share so we can make this podcast better each and every episode. Thanks again for listening in. I hope you guys have a phenomenal day. Take care.